You know about finding your way on cross-country trips by using your charts and looking out the window, that pilotage business we talked about earlier. You're also aware that you can navigate by combining pilotage with dead reckoning when you don't have recognizable landmarks to guide you. Both of these work well, but they're based on your ability to see checkpoints and depend on the wind remaining as forecast for you to stay on course. Since pilots are never satisfied with something being good enough, somewhere along the way, they decided that they needed to navigate without seeing checkpoints on the ground. Thus, radio navigation was born. There are several methods of radio or electronic navigation, including the three installed in this Skyhawk: VOR, ADF, and GPS. You'll find it very useful to combine them with pilotage and dead reckoning for more accurate navigation. Let's start with the most widely used form of radio navigation, VOR. This old geezer's been around for over 40 years and is still the cornerstone of the Federal Airways System. Federal Airways System sounds like something you'd use to fill up a congressman, doesn't it? Here's what a typical VOR station looks like on the ground. There is normally a clear area around it which prevents interference with the radio signal. Now, VOR stands for Very High Frequency Omni Range. So it should be no surprise that VORs transmit in the very high frequency, or VHF range. And this is specifically 108.0 to 117.9 megahertz. But as you know, with your VHF comm radios, you're limited to line-of-sight transmissions. Large objects, such as mountains, will block the signal from the station. Now, the station normally is not this close to a mountain. We just wanted to illustrate the blockage principle here. And so VOR signals are also line of sight, meaning that your reception will vary depending upon your altitude. The higher you are, the further you can be from the station and still receive usable signals. Now, the range in Omni Range means that it sends out directional signals that provide straight courses to fly. And the VOR station puts out these directional signals all the way around itself. Thus, the word omni in the name, from the Latin omnia, meaning all. Now, let's take a look at the way VORs are depicted on a sectional chart. The symbol for a VOR is a hexagon with a dot in the middle, usually encircled by a compass rose and accompanied by a communications box that gives the frequency and identifier. A VOR compass rose is always oriented to magnetic north. Let's take a look at the Auto VOR near Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I like Auto because anybody, even dyslexic people, can read this VOR. You can see that the compass rose is rotated clockwise so that the north arrow is right of true north, which, as you can see clearly, is depicted by this line of longitude right here. So in this case, it's clockwise because the variation in this area is 11 degrees east. If you were in an area with west variation, the compass rose would be rotated counterclockwise. There are two variants to the basic VOR symbol which show additional capabilities at a particular station. For instance, these tick marks affixed to alternating sides of the hexagon indicate that the station is a VOR-TAC, meaning it has both a VOR and a military TACAN. But if there's a square surrounding the hexagon, the station is a VOR-DME. And if your airplane has a DME, or distance measuring equipment, then it can show you how far you are from a VOR-TAC or a VOR-DME. Now, those omnidirections coming from a VOR are called radials. You can think of radials as coming out of the VOR just like spokes coming out of the hub of a wheel. And you define where you are from a VOR by the radial that you're on. So, If you were over the booming metropolis of Mud Lake, Idaho, near the Dubois VOR, which is right up here, D-U-B-O-I-S, Dubois, that's the French pronunciation. I don't know why they don't call it Dubois. They don't call this Mood Lake. Well, you could draw a line from the center of the VOR symbol to Mud Lake and read the radial that overlies Mud Lake on this compass rose. Each tick mark on the compass rose represents 10 degrees, and each half tick represents 5 degrees. So in this example, you'd be on approximately the 203 degree radial from the Dubois VOR. If that radial were a highway called Route 203, it wouldn't matter which direction you were moving, you'd still be on Route 203. Well, the same is true with radials. It doesn't matter whether you're moving toward or away from the VOR, you'd still be on the 203 degree radial. Now, let's extend that line through the other side of the VOR, northeast past the Dubois VOR center, heading toward these farms out here on the edge of the picture. Well, the name of your highway or radial would have changed. That's because all radials begin at the VOR, and once you cross the top of it, you're on another radial. So in our example, you'd find yourself 180 degrees from the 203 degree radial or on the 023 degree radial coming in this direction. Now let's take a look at a different VOR and the communications box associated with it and try to figure out what all this stuff associated with the box means. First, the station symbol comes equipped with those famous tick marks, so you know right away that you're really dealing with a VOR-TAC. Next, looking at the communications box, you can see that the name is Fellows. And in order to receive the station, you need to dial frequency 117.5 into your nav receiver. FLW is the three-letter identifier for this station. So if you entered FLW on a flight plan, everyone would know that you're flying to the Fellows VOR-TAC because there is no other FLW in the country. Now here's something that will be majorly helpful to you. If you tune 117.5 into your nav radio and turn up the volume and listen, you'll hear the Morse code for that three-letter identifier. The problem is, I don't know Morse code. And as a matter of fact, very few of my friends do, because they have even more of a life than me. So if you're a Morse illiterate like me, when you hear the Morse code, all you need to do is listen to the identifier, then follow along with the frequency box where the dots and dashes for the identifier are shown and compare them. And you will be able to tell audibly whether you're tuned to that station. You'll be surprised. You'll pick it up right away. That way you'll know that you're tuned into FLW and not some other VOR. Now, if you look underneath this box, you see that Rancho Murrieta is the controlling flight service station for this VOR-TAC. That's who you talk to through this facility. Note too, this 122.1R on the top of the box. The R stands for receive only. And what that means is that the flight service station can only listen to you. It can't transmit back to you on that frequency. So if you set 122.1 in your comm radio, they can hear you, but you couldn't hear them on your comm radio. The flight service station can, however, transmit over the VOR frequency, and you'd be able to listen to them on your nav receiver. If there were other frequencies listed here without this little R, then you could talk and listen on those frequencies on your comm radio. VORs work on the principle of the phase difference in two radio signals. Did I see some heads nodding off out there? Look, don't worry, this is not a long electronics lesson. Everything I know about electricity is static. Now, you can get your mind around this concept by thinking of a tower with two lights on it. One light rotates at a constant rate around the tower, but has a very narrow beam so that it can only be seen by the viewer just as it passes the viewer's position. The other light flashes and can be seen in all directions, an omnidirectional light, only when the rotating light exactly passes magnetic north. If you know how fast the rotating light is moving, it's a simple matter to start a timer when the omnidirectional light flashes as the rotating light passes north. Then note the time when you see the rotating light at your position. A little math will tell you what your bearing is from the station. And voila, that's how a VOR works. There is one signal that is broadcast only when the rotating signal passes north. The VOR receiver in your aircraft measures the time or phase difference in these two signals and comes up with a bearing or radial from the station.
You're listening to the smooth, breezy sounds of Mission Bay VOR 117.8 on your nav radio.
Now, a Morse code identifier and sometimes a voice ID are transmitted from each VOR. But your voice ID probably won't sound as much like an out-of-work disc jockey as it does like a computer-generated voice ID. Although it may not seem necessary to identify VORs in this age of digital tuning, listening to the identifier is still the only way to verify that the VOR is in service and reliable, and that you have not made any error dialing in the digits. If the identifier is not being transmitted, the VOR signal should not be considered reliable. Let me give you an example. When the maintenance people are working on a VOR, perhaps to realign the signal, they remove the ident code, but often need to leave the VOR navigation signal on the air. So, in spite of the age and limitations of the system, all of the airways in the United States and most of the world have been built on radials of VORs. The highways in the skies are charted from VOR to VOR and have been the backbone of the air navigation system for decades. And now that you know all about VOR stations, you'll know how to identify them and when they are reliable to use for that long cross-country trip of yours coming up. Plus, you'll have added another round of ammunition to your arsenal of amazing aviation acronyms.